started, I just want to give one last plug for a great event that we have coming up this weekend, our Clearly Indigenous Artist Exchange and Hands-On Exploration. If you haven't grabbed one of our rack cards, please grab one on your way out. This is going to be a really fantastic celebration of this incredible exhibition that's up only until August 18th. So please join us for this event. We will be having artist talks and a gallery walkthrough with the exhibition curator in the morning at the KIA here in the auditorium. And then in the afternoon, we'll head over to Glass Art Kalamazoo. We'll have live demos. We'll have a hands-on activity where you can actually create something to take home yourself. So we really, really encourage you to sign up and come to this event if you'd like. It should be a good one. So that is this Saturday, August 10th, starting at 9 here at the KIA. Right? So today we will be hearing from artist Richard Aardsma and Olivia Stier. This is our third and final art break highlighting artists whose work was selected for the 2024 West Michigan Area Show. And if you've not had a chance already, I really encourage you to check out all of the extraordinary work by local artists that's on view in this exhibition following today's presentations. So I'm just going to briefly introduce both of our artists, and then I'm going to turn the floor over to them. So Olivia Stier is a multimedia artist currently working on her BFA with an emphasis in photography at Western Michigan University. Her work explores grief, memory, and the spaces where the two intersect. Her work in portraiture offers an intimate look into the feelings of isolation, loneliness, and detachment that come from grieving. Her print, An Offering, was selected for this year's Southwest Michigan Printmakers Excellence in Printmaking Award. Next up, we will have photographer Richard Aardsma, whose work has been shown in national and international exhibitions and won numerous awards. He received a BA degree in studio art from Hope College, where he experimented with photo imagery and went on to complete graduate work in intaglio printmaking at Michigan State University. Richard finds inspiration for his photomontages in the evolution of the photographic still life in modern and postmodern art, seeking to create images that combine traditional aesthetics and conceptual art. Please join me in welcoming Olivia and Richard.
Hi. Can everyone hear me all right? All right. Thank you for that introduction. That was really sweet. So yesterday I went fishing at my childhood best friend's house with their dad and our other friend. And I've only been fishing once before, but for some reason I was just like really cleaning up. I was just catching so many fish. And over dinner we were talking about this talk and what I would talk about. And their dad just says, I think you just tell them you fish now. So I wanted to tell you that I'm actually just here to talk about that I fish now, and that's really what this is about. So if you were expecting to hear about my art, you're actually going to hear about the fish I caught. Also, don't ask why I'm holding them that way. I just learned to fish. I haven't nailed it. I haven't nailed it yet. But anyways, okay. My name is Olivia Stier. I was born and raised here in Kalamazoo, and I've spent most of my life here. Besides a few years that I lived in Grand Rapids, and a few years I lived outside of Seattle, Washington. The Great Lakes region has always felt like home to me. I feel immensely inspired by the landscapes and the comforts of home and the time I've spent here. I do often find it to be difficult to talk about myself and even more difficult to talk about my artistic practice because it feels really hard to quantify something that is so important to you and so precious to you, but I'm going to try. Also, these are my favorite pictures of me as a kid. I feel like this is like, when I think about like preciousness and like think about like a precious art practice, I think about myself as being precious, and looking at these photos like kind of reminds me of that. So yeah, I think an art practice is really sacred. I think you have to constantly nourish it, just like yourself. I've learned so much about practice over the years, and the biggest thing I've learned is that you have to practice the practice. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes showing up and telling on yourself and putting in the time and energy. And above all else, it takes the want to hold that practice in your hands and care for it so deeply. I think for so many of us, we make art because we have to. and not in like a way that feels unpleasant or that we don't have another choice, but more because it just makes sense. I make art because what else would I do with all my feelings? What else would I do with my imagination? It's really hard to imagine times in my life where I didn't create because it feels like such an integral part of my being. If you spend time with me, you'll learn that I love street debris. I love it. I love dead animals, disassembled food. I love trash and strange happenings, weird building patterns, flowers, shadows. I document everything. I document everything I see constantly. Like every time I leave town, like this is what I have to show for. I feel people are always like, "How was your trip?" And I'm like, "Well, I saw this like really cool chair on the side of the road, and there's like this cracked egg that was kind of cool. Yeah, it was great. It was a great trip. Thanks for asking." But really, the strange parts of life are what inspires me the most. And I'm often asked where I find inspiration, so I'm going to read a little list I wrote. I find it while riding my bike, when swimming in the lake, when my hands are in the garden. I find it in the cemetery behind my house, in the cicadas in late August, in the sounds of spring. I find it while sitting on my friend's porch at sunset, watching the leaves fall in October, and in the shadows. I find it in the liminal spaces and in the early mornings and late nights. I find it as the sun moves across my quiet house. I find it as the snow falls. I find it while I drift to sleep. I'm an incredibly nostalgic person, and it's mostly because I am very deeply moved and inspired by memory, in the way that memory like attaches to a space and the way that my memories feel. Memories feel very safe to me, and it always felt like a space that is kind of constantly becoming over and over again. You know, the present always becomes the then. So yeah, just a little bit of what inspires me, but really like my biggest inspiration is grief. My roommate and very dear friend Cam and I often say, just like about everything, we're always like, oh, it's always grief. We're just, so it always comes back to it. And for me, that's true. To some degree, I kind of feel like I've always been grieving. Like I was just sort of born into it. It felt like for so long, it's kind of like what I knew the best. And I just, to some degree, I kind of do know it best. Bill Davis, who's in the crowd, who's my professor and mentor, once told me he thought I had a crush on grief. I was like, that's probably true. No, that might be true, but not really. I just think when you know it so well, it kind of colors everything. And for so long, I just like didn't know what to do with that grief. But now I sort of like let it become this thing. And with that, wait, hello? Oh, I lost a slide, but okay, we'll look at this picture. But there was supposed to be a picture of my dad up here. A lot of the work that I make recently comes as a response to working through the grief of losing my dad. When I was 20 years old, I was attending Kendall College of Art and Design in Grand Rapids when my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. I still remember that day that I got the call because I just like walked for miles and miles and miles because I just knew that if I stopped moving, the reality would set in, and I just wasn't ready for that. So I just like walked until I like literally could not walk any further. And only 5 months from that diagnosis, my dad died, and everything changed like so rapidly. I was really angry and bitter and confused. So I left. I dropped out of Kendall. I moved back home to Kalamazoo, and I kept myself so busy, because again, I wasn't ready to face it, that I wouldn't have to think about it. And for the years that followed that period, which was like 5 years, I just like traveled the country. I moved as far away as I could. I would work like 60 plus hours a week, and I didn't really make much art because I was so afraid of what the art would say. I was really afraid of the truth of it. I was afraid that if I made the art, then I would have to accept what was happening, and I just like wasn't ready to do that. So I ran from my grief for a long time until it started running back, honestly, like until it was chasing me, and I had to confront it. So yeah, I'll talk about my first, this first series I want to talk about is called Grief Practice. And grief practice is like this idea that I've thought about, that I've really been thinking about lately, which is just like this idea of like, not like practicing grieving, but like nourishing the grief. Like it's just like doing these things that sort of like allows the grieving and allows you to kind of work through it. Like yesterday, I was mentioning the fishing. Yesterday would have been my dad's 60th birthday, and I spent again, I was fishing with my like childhood best friend's dad, and like to me that's like grief practice, right? It's like doing this thing that was like nourishing this part of me that I really needed to be nourished. So yeah, but this series is titled Grief Practice, and it's really about identity through grief. And when making this, I sort of saw myself as two versions who were in opposition with each other. So I saw myself as the Olivia before and the Olivia after, because I felt like grief had really split me in half, and like I could never become whole again. And I do think that grief changes us in really big ways, and it made sense for me to see the other Olivia as someone besides myself. And I think it was kind of driven a little bit by like maybe a jealousy and a wish for a time that felt safer and simpler and easier. But yeah, so it was really important for me. This is another photo from it. This series, I think, has 10 photos in total. And I worked in the studio for these, and I'd asked my friend Kate to model and be this other version of me. And it was important for me to find someone who resembled me, but didn't entirely look like me. You know, like we were like the same height and we had the same hair color, and like there was like similarities, but I wanted us to look different enough that it was obvious that there was this other Olivia. And I wanted to like, I kind of kept like our wardrobe simple, but also like a little contrasting, because I wanted there to be this like harmony, but also this like kind of push-pull relationship and this like tug at the other person. In the spring of 2023, my art practice really shifted to what it is now. I took an alternative process class with Ginger Owen, who's also in the crowd today, where we learned the cyanotype process, Van Dyke Brown, and gum bichromate printing. I had always really loved photography. I feel like my whole life I really loved it, but I often found myself like feeling stifled by the rigidness of like digital imagery and inkjet printing. And I had always loved the darkroom because I felt like it allowed me a little bit more room to like play and experiment. But even sometimes that too felt so calculated in a way that was like hindering the work I was making. But then I feel like taking this class like totally shifted it, because alternative process is so much about like experimentation and play, but also about being calculated as well. Like it just had this balance that I really needed. So here are some cyanotypes I made, which I really love because I felt like they were so just like very like easy to play with, and I could incorporate other elements. Like in these, I have sewn red thread through them, like around the houses or attaching the houses, and I really liked that. I liked that I could just do more with just like the image I had made. Here's another one I made, which was a Van Dyke Brown print. I didn't like Van Dyke when I first did it. I really struggled with it. But I really loved this piece, which was collaged. So it's like two separate prints and then collaged together. And then we also learned the gum bichromate process. And this is one of the first gum bichromate prints that I made. And I loved, though like I feel like now I can be so critical of it because I just like we'll talk about it. I've spent so much time with it. But this class really changed so much of my process that it's like so important for me to talk about, because after taking this, I realized that I wanted to do my senior thesis in gum bichromate printing, which is what I did. This is the biggest body of work I ever made, and sort of like the latest full series. It was titled An Offering, and it consisted of 18 4-layer gum bichromate prints. Though I would say none of them were just 4 layers. They were probably like 8 or 7, 9 or 10 layers. This work felt so precious to me. And in so many ways, like I said, it really like has defined my practice, because I worked on it for about a year and a half, I think, and maybe like a year and a half to 2 years in total, though like the last 9 months of the project was like really where I ramped it up and where I did like the majority of my printing. I was like every day in the darkroom, and it was like so comforting to me. It just felt like it felt like a way to like nourish myself and to nourish this practice. And I'll talk more about this project, but here's another close up of it. I also made all of the frames, which was like another sort of like just like tedious thing to do, but I'm so glad I did it because they're just like, I'm really proud of them. And it was like another just like thing where I just worked, you know what I mean? I just like went in and I just was sanding and sawing and cutting. And I really like things that feel meditative. I like things that, and I guess the way I see things being meditative is things that are also tedious. So tedious and meditative in my brain are like, yeah, that really just does it for me. So frame making, I think, kind of does it for me because you got to exercise a lot of patience. This is really the piece that started it out. I took this the like base image back in the winter of 2022. Bill Davis had shown me the work of Flora Garduño, and I was so deeply inspired by her work and just this like really beautiful way that she could create like ritual between like a person and an object. And I really like, I don't know, it's just like, I gotta like emulate that. Like I was just so inspired by it. It really like inspired this piece. And I worked in the studio originally for this, and not this version. I should have included it, but the like digital image of it I had hanging in my studio for about a year, and I really loved it, but it never felt complete to me. Like it was something I always went back to, but it was like it needs another life, but I don't know how to give it another life until I started working on my thesis and was really like thinking about what I was going to do. And I was like, oh my God, it's that piece that I love. It can have a second life. And this is actually what's on display over in the gallery right now, and what won the Excellence in Printmaking Award, which really feels like such an honor. And yeah, so basically when I was introduced to gum bichromate printing, it was like, oh, this image, this has got to do it. I'm going to back up just a little bit though, so I can talk about the gum bichromate process. So it's one of the oldest forms of photographic printing. It's a 4-color process that involves hand coating a mixture of gum arabic, potassium dichromate, and like a high quality watercolor. And then you expose your image like per layer, per color, using like UV light or sunlight. And as you coat and expose more layers, your image becomes clearer and more understood, yet all it really does is just build upon itself. So I really think about this sort of like layer by layer, memory by memory. Like I said, it's very tedious. It's incredibly tedious. And I think the thing with alternative process is it really like, you have to be so patient. It takes both like a balance of like concentration and experimentation, and you have to be ready for those like happy accidents, for the shifts. But it's very rewarding. And like I said, I had spent like almost every day in the darkroom just working on this. And because of the nature of gum bichromate printing, every print can just vary. So you have to pull at least doubles, if not more, of every single print, because like you can even see like my yellows are a little different. Like if I use just a little bit more pigment or a little less pigment, or my times vary, or the water temperature varies, or I don't know, just decided to print differently that day. So it was really important for me to pull doubles and triples at times. So in total, I actually made close to 50, I think was my full, like my final number, prints of these, which like each print probably, I don't know. Easily like a layer is like 2 hours worth of just like exposing time and washing time and drying time. Like if, so easily I think each print was like 10 to 15 hours maybe. But it didn't feel like a chore. Like it didn't feel like this like tedious thing that was like so heavy. It felt like just something I loved to do. Here's some more images from it. And I want to read my artist statement that I wrote for this show because I just think it really sums up the project well. So these prints act as an offering to my grief, like clothes hanging on a line or the first daffodil after a long winter, or swimming at the lake at night. Moments like these can never last. That is what makes them beautiful. Solace is fleeting. A memory becomes an echo of the past, a time from before, when before felt like something tangible. Grief sometimes feels like an object I can hold, and yet its inevitable qualities make it hard to contain. So where do I put the grief? I put it next to the peonies. I braid it into my hair. I swim with it in Lake Michigan. I bury it in the garden. I carry it with me while riding my bike. I bake it into bread. I mend it into my clothes. I set the grief free. I let it become something else for once. That's my statement. I think that, just like a little closing on it, I don't think that you have to heal. I don't think there's like any healing from grief, right? Like I think that it's not an open wound, though it sometimes feels like one. But I think it's just something you really tend to and care for and hold and let it take shape. And so much of this project for me was letting that grief take shape and become something. And it was about letting it sort of like working through the grief and sitting with it and like really just offering it up. I just like, that's all I thought about the entire time was like, I'm just like offering it up. I'm giving my grief something. I'm giving myself something. I'm just really nourishing it. Yeah. So after my thesis was completed, I was sort of like, well, what do I do now? I don't know. Like I've been working on something for so long, and I really felt like I needed to put my energy elsewhere. And at the time, I was taking a printmaking class at Western, and I made this 4-layer CMYK screen print. There's really a common theme here with me, and like, things that are like layered processes. Like something about it just like really feels good in my brain. And this is titled "I Had It Once," and it's talking a lot about the ways that like spaces hold memory. These are a bunch of different houses that I photographed. I'm very like inspired by space and houses, and really the way that like they kind of attach on to each other. And I sort of took all these different houses and then kind of tried to put them together and make them make sense to maybe make a new home. So some close-ups of it, and again, it was really inspired by space. And I think for a long time, home felt just like it was physical. But then I think a shift happens and home starts to feel like something else. Like, after my dad died, like my like childhood home, like I feel like it was like the moment I was like, oh my God, home is not just physical, because like now this home doesn't feel like safe, so to speak. It doesn't feel like what I thought home felt like. It's actually this other thing. And it's actually way more precious. It's like way more precious when it's not just a physical space and when it's like a feeling. But sometimes I can also feel very weighed down by that. Like I think a lot about like the ways that like the floor, like what the floorboards have witnessed, or like what the door frames have heard, or like what the walls think, or like, it can all feel so like suffocating, I think, at times, but also there's like a balance that can feel great too. Especially when you lose it, right? So like I had it once. I had this safety. I think I'm always trying to get back to it. The last piece I'm going to talk about is something I also kind of like pushed my energy towards. Like I actually started printing this like the day after my show. Like I just like needed to do something. And this is called "And I Lost Track of Time," and it's inspired a lot by the like rich and deep history of quilting as storytelling. I use like similar techniques to investigate the self as a missing person, one that has been lost to the ether of time and space. The entanglement of memory throughout the passage of time is explored through various imagery of both living and dead natural objects: a body, a branch, a dead deer, birds in the sky, and the leaves in autumn, a reminder of what once was and will never be again. When I was younger, I used to be very obsessed with these ideas of lost days, is what I called them, which were days that I classified as being lost to the ether of depression. And sometimes those days spread into weeks and months and even years. And they're just like times in my life that felt very difficult to remember. Like you can only really remember like the resurface, and you only remember the getting out. So yeah, I'm very interested in, again, memory and how sentient it feels. Like I could touch it if I wanted to. And I'd never made a quilt before this. I'd like sewed, but never made a quilt. And it was, yeah, like a really fun challenge to do. I like learned so much about it. Here's some close-ups of it. So to achieve this, like I said, this is cyanotype. It's printed on a thrifted like muslin cotton blend, like a bed sheet basically. And then I printed it using, UV light, and then I toned some of them. So the ones, the blue is like the cyanotype blue, but then the brown are still cyanotypes. But I first bleached them using sodium carbonate, which is like, honestly, it's really stressful because your whole image disappears. And you're just like, well, you just really hope it comes back. Like you're like, wow, this looks so great. Let me put it in this bath. And then, nope, it's gone. But then you put it in another bath. I put it in the Dectal, which is a photo developer. And it comes back. And it comes back dyed as this like beautiful brown color. And yeah, I making this quilt was also like another big shift in my art practice. Like it felt like this is kind of, yeah, like I think a little bit of too of like where I see myself going further. I'm working on another quilt that's going to be sort of similar to this, but I don't have any really imagery to show you. It's just like really loose sketches. So yeah, thank you all for coming and listening to me talk. It's really been an honor to share so much about my process and my artistic practice. If you have any questions, I will take them now. Otherwise, we'll listen to Richard speak. Yay! Yeah, so the question is, do I use watercolor in the photographs? And yeah, so gum bichromate printing, you need to use watercolor. That's like what creates the color in it. So you use like this like gum arabic, which is a tree sap, and then you like mix it with that watercolor to make the pigment. And then there's like a chemical that like allows for the reaction to happen and allows for it to stay on the image.
Thank you for honoring your father so beautifully.
Thank you.
The way you speak is like a photographer, poet.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Cool. Well, I think Richard's going to speak now. Thank you.
Well, that was a beautiful presentation that you gave. So a hard act to follow. Okay, my name is Richard Aardsma, and this is I consider myself a photo montage artist, which is mostly done or is done with the computer, that part of it. So it isn't like a traditional collage where things are pasted together. And my website is richardaardsma.com. It's a good thing I put it up there because I need to update it. But you'll see a lot of, or at least there's a fair amount of art on there, and most of it doesn't look like the piece that I have in this show. But there are similarities. I'll see if I can figure this out. Okay, this is the photograph montage that's in the show. And before I get into detail about it, I'd like to talk about how I got here to this point. And this was the original photo. And if I click back, you can see things were added. But there's quite a bit of narrative here, and I'll probably end with that. But first, okay, this was the copy that I put on next to my piece in the gallery. And I'll go through the points. The first one, my inspiration from still lifes or from modern, postmodern art. Maybe to simplify that, I'll just say I was influenced by 20th century art to contemporary art, specifically the still life. And my goal by doing this, by creating my still lifes, is I want to stick with the traditional aesthetics used in painting and drawing, and then using that with digital media. And in the piece also, the piece that's in the show, it does have a conceptual art messaging in it. And I'll talk about that. Now, getting back to the history of the still life, this is, I think, anonymous, but it's a public domain image, which was done about the turn of the last century, which is really a pretty bad piece of art. As far as the composition, it's symmetrical, so you can like cut it down the middle and it mirrors itself. And that's kind of the first thing you tell somebody not to do, like a 101 art class. Now, the first work, the work that inspired the series, let me find it. Was actually a commissioned work of art, and I completed it in 2016. It was a show that was put on by the Muskegon Art Museum, and they picked about 20 artists to participate in the show, and they paid money for cost of materials. Each artist was given a specific beer color, which didn't realize they had that. There's actually a book of beer colors, and they're numbered. And I don't know which number this was. But the other stipulation for the show, that color had to occupy 75% of the painting or the work of art, whether it's a painting, photograph, whatever. And this, to me, was very challenging. It was, I wanted something, the first thing that came to my mind, I liked the idea, okay, since this is a show that was promoting Michigan brewers, well, maybe I'll look at old ads. And so this is highly influenced by advertising art. And here I'm trying to make the beer glass is kind of bigger than life and trying to make it very inviting. And also, like advertisements from that period, they were, for beer, were pretty much masculine. So there's that element, which I'm kind of making fun of, really. And what I find interesting recently is that some people really take that serious. If you remember, you know who Kid Rock is? He's an entertainer, musician. Okay, you could go on YouTube. He's got an automatic weapon and he's blowing up beer cans because he was offended, that the suggestion that, only macho men drink beer. So that was kind of fun. And a lot of my work, besides the still lifes, I do use nostalgia, both positive, I think, and negative. And in order to create this particular work, initially, it's based pretty much on just one photo. But in order to make this 75% of the image, specific color, actually took quite a bit of time. And I definitely had to use Photoshop. So the original photo, I don't have it. The radio is actually yellow. And I had to take that out and did a lot of playing around with it. And then when I got done, I had it printed, and typically I use the same printer, I think is very good at what he does. But what you realize when you have to have a very specific color, what you're seeing on your monitor and what's printed is never exact. So I wound up having to do, at least a dozen proofs. So the money I received for materials pretty much was burned up just doing the proofs for it. So I did manage to do it, and they liked it so much they used it as the flyer for the show. And I have an example of the print and the flyers on the back table, if you want to look at that. So what I found interesting about that, I created fine art that's influenced by advertising art, but then is used as advertising art. So it's kind of a fun deal. Okay, from there, and this is done last year, which what I've done, okay. So what's similar to the piece that's in this show is the dark background. And what I liked, or what I was trying to do here, is make the negative space as important as a positive space. So it works as a unit. And the arrangement, there's an underlying grid that holds the thing together. Again, this image is definitely nostalgic, but the typewriter and the camera, I think they look fairly used. And then the old magazines in the corner are also, from the 1950s or whatever. One of my statements here is examining older technology and how does that differ with what we have today with digital technology, computers. They were definitely different. The first thing that comes to mind to me is that they were very slow in comparison to what we have now. So if you're going to type something, okay, you type it, then you bring it to somebody or you mail it to somebody. And if it's going to go in a publication, probably has to be retyped. So there's a lot of steps there, where now you can kind of type it, put it online, it's there. So in the same day, you can have something out there. Where here, with these tools, maybe they're more, what you do is more thoughtful, possibly, than it is now. Not really sure about that. But I'm sure that the tools shape the message in some form or another. And then the pencil and the compass, drafting compass, were still tools used, I still use them now, but much more then. And often when you're going to type something, then you would first use a pencil and a yellow pad and write it all out. Because with typing, with a just a manual typewriter, you make a mistake, that's kind of a problem. So that's why they invented whiteout. Whatever. And another thing, if you wanted to have, you want to have more than one person view it, well, you use carbon paper. So you have another copy of it. Now this shows the underlying grid, which helps stabilize it, I think pulls the piece together. So it's a geometric abstraction. And I think the objects themselves have geometric shapes, the camera lens and the keys, whatever. So that's the beginning of the series. This piece was in the Kalamazoo show here last year, which again has got the dark background, but I'm also kind of pushing it. I'm pushing the negative space and the positive space further. So here the objects kind of exist just in space almost. And excuse me, the fact that there's a hole in the lamp and then there's the kind of the sculptured vase, which I'm using as like it's a small sculpture, has holes in it, so that the background is really integrated into the three objects. The narrative is these are like knockoffs that have become popular of mid-century modern design. It's become very popular, and among younger people. So I found these three objects, put them together, and thought as a unit, it had a strong presence, and there's somewhat of a sense of mystery about it. Okay. Now, this is more typical of the work I've been doing. And the reason why I'm showing this is because a lot of the photos were taken at the Gilmore Car Museum, which is quite close to here, if you remember that. So the idea I have in mind here, and what's different about this one from the still lifes, is there's much more layering here. The similarity is that it is quite flat, so the elements all seem to be close to the surface of the canvas. This expresses, I think, a kind of a positive mindset people had mid-century, the belief in science, that maybe in the future there'd be a utopia. Walt Disney is like a utopian. He had the city of the future. So there was this really nice, that belief in the future, which we really lost. Just isn't there, which is kind of sad. And then design of automobiles. Design, you could do, you could do what you wanted with it, because there was no concern about aerodynamics, safety, whatever. All you did, you just created what you wanted to do. So I think it's kind of a fun piece. The diner, that's the diner at Gilmore. And then the gas station, excuse me, that's the Shell gas station that's also there. And then the automobiles are there too. And I exhibited this at Art Prize. It was 2019. That's my wife, Marilyn. She's holding up a bus. I don't know if you can see that. It's pretty small. So that's the one object that was very tiny that I used. And as you can see, it's a fairly big piece and it's 3 panels. To create an image of size, you do have to have at least if it's just it's a camera, consumer camera, it has to be at least fairly high grade. And I use a mirrorless camera. It's a Sony. People have asked me, what about using cell phone cameras? And that's okay. But typically, to have a high quality print, about 8 by 10 is about the limit. Though I've seen people go bigger than that, but then it's outside and there's more light. And you can do that. Now I'm going to go back to the beginning. Okay. So this was the initial photograph. And in this piece, again, there's the dark background. And which, like the other ones that I've showed you, the setup, it's a tabletop lighting system where I have lights pointed in different directions. And there's a lot of experimentation with light. But like the earlier works that I showed you, like the one with the cars, there was a lot of Photoshop there. And lately I've been doing just more, getting into just doing the photo itself and trying to capture what I want, that way. So that's the original photo. But I also, I found objects that I thought related to the camera. And I thought, well, maybe I can make it more interesting by maybe I changed one of the titles, and then the one in the history of photography. I decided, well, I'll embellish that by adding on a couple archival royalty-free images. And that's what I did. And then the one on the right, that's like a 1940s street scene of Cuba. And then underneath the pencil is the Titanic. So I think that helps draw that idea together. And then the top book, the big question is, what makes photography art? Which is something that I ask myself a lot. And when you ask that, then you're also asking really what makes art art. So that opens up a big conversation there. The camera, this is like an old Polaroid, and I really like this as, in terms of geometric abstraction. It's got these great shapes in it. There's rectangles within it, and circles, and it's just a beautiful object. One thing that came to mind to me first was the movie 2001, Space Odyssey. How about hail? The lens reminds me of the hail, kind of looking. So there is this, it's, all the talk about artificial intelligence. It's quite amazing. In a movie made in 1969, Stanley Kubrick is talking about that, way before there was personal computers. And now, okay, that's really something we're starting to be concerned about, worried about. And also the lens is, to me, like maybe a surveillance camera. How we're giving up privacy, by using smartphones and whatever, not thinking a lot about it, but maybe we should. I'll go back. So a lot of what I do think it out first. So I'm not looking for happy accidents. I pretty much kind of have an idea and then play with it. And I had one art prof said, when you do an image, try to make it as interesting as you can. And so that's one of my intents. So are there any questions? Yes.
So why the pencil? I have to ask.
Okay. I like the idea of having something really close to the picture plane. So it just pushes everything a little further forward. That's really the only reason. And as a compositional device, I think it balances out a little bit better. The focal length in this photo is extremely narrow, and I'm using the lens I'm using. What's in focus is only within a few inches, really. So if you look at the Life magazine, it's out of focus in the back. But what's in front is in focus. So the pencil's in focus, and that's kind of what, it's just more like just a compositional device. Anybody else? Yes.
There seems to be a little bit of blur on that second book. Is that actually on the book? What makes photography art? Cover.
Is the cover up? Yeah, it's out of focus. Yeah, it's
On the book.
yeah, I did that intentionally.
Okay.
So you would focus just on the title. Anybody else? Yes.
Have you always been interested in photography, or did you come to photography later?
Well, excuse me. When I started college, I got involved with printmaking, etching, that kind of thing. But somebody introduced to me the use of a photo emulsion that I could put on the metal. And so I was able to put photo images and combine that with etching. And that was kind of interesting. And at about the same time, well, actually, after I got out of college and started working in, the commercial art field, I got into photography. So my start was really more, at the commercial level. But it didn't take long, and I had my own dark room, and I was doing things. And in the back on the table, I have a silkscreen print that I did it was probably in the 1980s. And I found the original photo that I used, and then the photo that he used to make the positive for the silk screen. So I've been dabbling with this, for quite a long time. And I spent years doing film photography, black and white. And I enjoyed it, but I was more into the printmaking, and making prints, doing the silk screen. But when it came to when Photoshop came out, it was in 1990. I actually bought the first, bought it then when it came out. Went to Chicago, the Print Expo, and they were exhibiting it. And what they did was, for the demonstration, it was a woman's blouse and there was a button missing, and the guy cloned the button and then moved it down, and everybody went, oh, it just amazed. So, and I think I was too, but I've been using it for so long, now I'm getting excited about getting away from it, using it less. But yeah, I've used pretty much instant photography for a very long time. And I'm not a purist by any means. I mean, I know I have friends who they're strictly film, and it's just fine. But for me, I don't, just not that interested. In fact, my most expensive camera is a film camera that I haven't used for a very long time. But I've never owned a professional camera. And I think, well, I guess I don't need it. Now, if I was going to make photos a lot bigger than what I do, then I might have to. But I also have quite a bit of software that can raise, that can improve the resolution and dynamic range and all that business. So maybe I just spent my money on that instead of a lot of money on cameras. Yes.
How about your props?
The props?
Yeah, some of the different props you can use.
Okay.
Where we got them from.
Okay. I mean, for this one, or?
Any of them.
Okay. Well, the Polaroid camera. It's my wife Marilyn asking a question. We own that camera, and the books. Those are our books. And a Life magazine. I've got a collection of old magazines. I like to look at old ads for ideas. These are all objects that I own too. Okay, I'll correct that. The Brownie flash camera, I did borrow that from somebody. But the radio, that's ours. And that's a model airplane that I own. So there is something personal too, I think, when you own the objects. And it's, still lifes in general, it's kind of like you're looking over, I think, the artist's shoulder, and you're kind of imagining, him arranging things. So in a sense, he's kind of like God or something, where he has all this power. He's a puppeteer, and this is what he put together, and that it creates a presence. Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you.